Welcome to Pathfinder Friday. We are going to be talking today about the Game Mastery Guide. I'm Logan Bonner. I'm one of the designers here at Paizo Inc. And with me today is Leo Glass.
Hi, I'm Leo.
Leo's on the editing team, and he is kind of the editing lead on this project. So kind of every project has somebody from each team who is the point of contact on it. And so Leo is the editor who kind of knows the most about this book.
And I'm happy to be here today, and I'm super excited to talk about the Game Mastery Guide because personally, this is going to be one of my favorite releases for second edition. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to help out with the book. And we're here to tell you all sorts of fun things and give you a sneak peek about the book, which I know you're super excited for. So Logan, I kind of wanted to just start with a question. So let's fast forward into the future.
Yeah.
We have a Game Mastery Guide in our hand. We open it up. There's that crackle of the fresh page, that new book smell.
Yeah.
What do you see in the book?
So the first thing you're going to see, the first part of the book is advice on running your game. This is kind of a book that is for game masters who are just getting started and for experienced ones. It's all about kind of building things for your game and how to run your game. So you're going to start out with advice. The whole first chapter is advice about how to run things, how to structure your campaigns, how to design adventures, that sort of thing.
Okay.
The second chapter is all kind of more specific tools. So that's going to have things like how to build creatures and hazards and items. It's going to have some different kind of magic items, information on how to kind of build your worlds, nations, settlements. And some of that stuff is going to be things like how to read a stat block for a settlement so that if those appear in adventures, and you aren't quite sure how they work, you can look them up.
Building creatures, you mentioned. Will building NPCs be a part of that too?
Yeah, it will.
Okay.
And we'll go into that one a little more in detail later, and I'll kind of cover that. The creatures is kind of for anything you're building.
Gotcha.
Then chapter 3 is subsystems. So those are things that are like not going to appear in every session or necessarily every game, but that you can jump into and use as you need. So that would have things like systems for doing research or for using vehicles in your game, those kind of rules. For doing like hex mat exploration, over long terms, some of that kind of stuff. Chapter 4 is variant rules. So that's going to be things like I want to do backgrounds differently, or I want to not have alignment in my game, or I want to not use level as a part of proficiency bonus and kind of do a different bonus scale. That's all on there. And then chapter 5 is kind of the one that is kind of like really like the most utilitarian, like stuff you can just grab and use because that's all NPCs. So chapter 5 is the NPC Gallery. If you use the first edition Game Mastery Guide, that's going to be fairly familiar because it had the same type of thing with a bunch of kind of pre-made NPCs.
Got it. So how do y'all make decisions on what goes into a book like this? Like, what's that look like from the design perspective?
So this is one of the books. A lot of books, when you get into it, it's like, well, what are we going to put in here? How much, what kind of things do we want to put in this? This is one where it's like we have more than we can possibly fit in this kind of book. It's the same thing with like the first bestiary, right? Where it's like, well, there are 1,000 monsters we could put in here. Which ones are we going to narrow it down to? This book is kind of similar to that. So really, we kind of focus on like which ones are the most generally useful. What types of advice do we know people are going to want to reference again and again and again? So that's stuff like building creatures or designing adventures. It's things like these are foundational to the game. We want this book to be one that you can use for years and years and years and still feel like you need it, like you're going to keep referencing it.
Got it. There was a good question that moved itself up that was from a Shamantalu. Sorry if I'm butchering that terribly, but are there any rules on how to remove or alter level proficiency or
yeah. So the section, one of the variant rules is doing proficiency without level. So that's basically going to say you're just going to use +2, +4, +6, +8, and you're not going to include level into it, which implementing the first part of that, like the basics of that, is really easy because your character just has a different proficiency modifier before. The things that are a lot tougher are you have to build encounters differently, and the number of enemies someone can take on is different. So we kind of talk about how to build those encounters and kind of how the game is going to play differently if you have that change in your rules.
Gotcha. There's a question that is kind of interesting to me because I feel like all these products do kind of interface. It's Captain Nemo 726. Can you discuss how the advanced GM screen will work with the book?
The advanced GM screen, so the book itself, a lot of it is kind of like stuff you'll use away from the table, because it's like, if I've built a creature, I don't necessarily have to have the building a creature section with me at the table. I just need to, print out the creature or,
Sure.
put it on my phone or whatever.
Right.
So the screen is going to be kind of like, all right, I've looked at the normal GM screen and I've said like, it's got a whole bunch of stuff that's really great if you're just starting out, but you might not necessarily need if you've gotten really well versed with the game.
Sure.
So that GM screen is going to replace some of the options with ones that are kind of a little more advanced, or some of the topics that are in the Game Mastery guide.
Okay.
And we also, like, if folks have ideas about like things that they don't think they're going to need from the basic screen, or things they think would be really useful to have on the advanced screen, like go to the forums, post those, because that's all really useful information for us to have. We're still kind of in the process of figuring out like what do we think people are going to know enough that we can remove it. So something like the action symbols. If you're
Sure.
if you've been playing the game for a while, you probably don't need those on the screen anymore. So what else can we put on there
Right.
to take that spot that is going to be useful for you?
And how are you going to make decisions, you think, on? So I just think it's really awesome that you'll have like maybe subsystems or variant rules that you'll utilize. Like, is it mostly going to be based on feedback from the community, or how do y'all make those decisions?
For what's going to be on the screen, or for how
for actually what will be on the GM screen?
A lot of it is just going to be kind of stuff that we think is going to be most useful to you in the moment.
Sure.
Like when you're actually using the screen, you need things that it's like, well, I don't have this on the top of my head, and it's going to slow down the game a lot if I go look it up in a book, so I have it at hand. So that's
Sure.
going to be the main stuff we put on there.
Gotcha. I just noticed I got a shout out from Lincoln and I laughed. Yeah, I agree. I think the advanced screen sounds really cool. Herod Wizard, I think that, like, to me, just being able to sit down, use the book, and use the screen is really cool.
Yeah.
So I know you wanted to talk a little bit in depth and just kind of
Yeah.
cover some of the basics. So where would you like to start?
So there are a few sections that we kind of have some extra detail about. And actually, Peyton, can you throw up the image of the cover? Because we've talked about kind of what's in the book, but that's what's going to stare at you when you first open the book. So that's one of Wayne's pieces. Yeah, it's really
love
gorgeous.
that art.
So that's when you can, when you're not using your book, you can put that on your shelf and have that dragon staring out at everybody who comes to visit. So so one of the sections I want to talk about is the building creatures section, because that's something I know people have had a lot of questions about.
Right.
And one that's pretty detailed. So it's going to kind of walk you through the process of making a creature. As folks probably already know, this version of the game does not have you kind of building out a creature with feats and picking all its skills and that kind of thing. It's going to start with the bonuses. And one of the things that we do here is we kind of break those down into 4 categories for most bonuses. We have kind of an elite for like, this is the absolute best monster for this. So that would be like an extremely stealthy creature's stealth. Like that's going to be an elite number. High, which is like, it's really good at this. So most monsters are going to have like at least 1 save that's in that zone. Then there's going to be kind of moderate, which is like middle of the road. And then there's going to be low, which is, it is actively bad at this. That might be like the attack bonus of a wizard type creature that you're making.
Right.
So most things are kind of broken out that way. So you can kind of, or actually I think I said elite for the top category. It's actually called extreme. It was called elite for a while, but we have the elite adjustments, so we switched that out.
Got
it. So you can kind of use that knowledge for everything when you're building your monster.
Sure.
And it's going to give you like the damage amounts and the bonuses for various things. And then there's a lot in there about kind of the advice for how to best build a monster.
I was going to say, when I looked at it, it seemed like there was a lot of advice on how to sort of, if you pick an extreme ability, maybe how to balance that with some of the more moderate or lower ones, and but give a lot of variance and creativity in your monster building through that.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we really try to emphasize with this edition, is that monster building is an art, not just math.
Right.
That was one of the problems that could come up with the first edition system, was that it looked right, but it could still end up with a weird monster. So we have a lot more kind of about the advice of how to best build a monster, what abilities to pick. And one of the things we emphasize is kind of like comparing your monster and its abilities to pre-existing things. Like, look at the bestiary, see what things are similar. Look at the spells, see what things are similar to the abilities you want to give your monster. So that you are kind of like doing the same type of work we do when we build monsters, which is to kind of look at the whole, ecosystem and pick the parts that make the most sense. And one of the parts that is important to that we've changed a fair amount is like making sure that each monster does some things that are really evocative and are specific to that monster.
Yeah, you can see that, I think, not only through the bestiary, but how it sort of builds into this book. And I love looking at, we'll talk about the NPC gallery later, but I really want to talk and I'm excited to talk about some special abilities because of that, because you can really get that sort of there. It's both creative and mathematical. And I think to me that really just enhances the design, because both of those things I love as a GM. So. Yeah.
And that was one of the things that in first edition we had the NPC classes,
right?
Which tended to like not really say a whole lot about who that creature was when you use them. So we've kind of moved to an approach that's more like make the NPC the same way you would a monster and give it interesting things that fit its theme. Yeah. So you can kind of make something like, you can make the baker bake very well without having to also make it really good at attacking, which could, even with some of those NPC classes, could end up with weird situations.
I want to shout out to Classic DM and read this question, and then we need to talk about our giveaway, but because they informed me to use the mic earlier, and I really appreciated that. Can we scroll back down that question right? There we go. Will there be ways, Classic DM writes, will there be ways to build signature villains from, say, Drow in the Bestiary to work at higher level without just making them an NPC using the class feats or spells?
Yeah, so the main thing you'd want to do is kind of scale up the monster. So you can kind of look at those numbers in the Game Master Guide and kind of set use the initial Drow as a baseline and scale it up. And then, look at like if it's a spellcaster, make sure that you give it its full spells and that sort of thing. So a lot of it's the same sort of process, right? You're not kind of saying like, well, I'm going to give it levels of fighter or whatever. You're looking at it for what you intend to use it for,
right? And
then you're building it specifically to what you need it to be.
Awesome. So I mentioned a giveaway, and I want to talk about it. Peyton will set it all up in chat for you, but we're giving away 2 items to one lucky viewer today. Giving away this Pathfinder Second Edition poster, which is really, really cool. I would love to have this hanging up in my office.
It has the art off the core rulebook.
Yep. And this Hero Point Fumbus coin by Campaign Coins, which is the special edition campaign coin that has Fumbus on one side and the Pathfinder logo on the other. So be a part of that giveaway.
All right.
So back to building
Looks
creatures.
Like people are getting into the giveaway already.
Oh, okay. Awesome. Perfect. Good luck. So what more can we talk about as far as building creatures, or do we want to move on? Or what were you thinking?
Building creatures, like, it's pretty comprehensive. There's a lot of advice. There's also the system. I know a lot of people have kind of talked about like the Pathfinder Unchained and Starfinder systems for building creatures.
Sure.
This one's a little different because it kind of goes, rather than having like kind of a table by type of monster, it goes a little more in depth. So you'll find like the stats that are good, and then rather than having kind of like here's the expert table, we have a section at the start that kind of says like, if you want an expert style creature, these are the numbers you probably want to use for the various stats. So it's a little more exploded out. It's a little more detailed. Part of that is to make it so monsters aren't quite as similar to one another.
More customizability, just like in character creation.
Yeah.
Too. Yeah. Got it.
And then there's also some of those for each class. So if you're trying to make something that's similar to a monk, it's going to give you a really quick way to apply that.
Got it. Let's see if there are any other questions. So one of the things that I noticed in building creatures is sort of a line that said, narrowing your selections down basically to the smallest and most compelling when designing abilities. Yeah. And that really stood out to me because I was actually just working on an organized play quest a couple weeks ago. And what was really awesome is that I could make an NPC that was using these rules that was really different and creative, in that I wanted to make a bandit, but it was a bandit in a monastery. So I was like, okay, how can I combine rogue and monk in an interesting way? And this system really sort of seemed like, oh, hey, I can not only combine the special abilities, but I can look at the recommendations for rogue and monk and kind of pick and choose. Can you speak a little bit to that, of the kind of the buffet of designing characters and special abilities? And
one of the things we've really put a lot of thought into is kind of when you're using a creature, making sure that the choices you make are really going to reflect the theme of that creature.
Right.
So you'll notice like a lot of creatures in bestiaries that might have had 17 spell-like abilities in first edition. We've looked at those and said like, well, it had chain lightning and it had lightning bolts. Let's pick kind of like the most iconic thing and have it do that. And,
what is the coolest lightning ability it can do?
Right. Yeah. And a lot of that is all about kind of saying to the GM, it's like, okay, these are your options, and you're going to be pretty easily able to sort things like, well, it has sending. I don't need to use sending right now, but it might use chain lightning right now, to kind of make it so that you aren't picking between two things that look really similar.
Right.
But and fulfill the same thematic niche. So that's one of the things we've changed a lot, and that's kind of how we tell people to approach the monsters. Is kind of you don't need to pick every single spell from first level to 9th level if you're making a creature that can cast 9th level spells. Do the work you think is going to be most important, and then if you need to improvise, we know that the GM can still do that.
But if you want to, you still can too. So it accommodates both.
Yeah. And we do talk about a little bit in the book about the difference between making an NPC from scratch using the character creation rules, and how you end up with a different type of creature if you do that than if you use the creature building guidelines that are in this book.
Cool. We've got a question actually from the forums. Gary D asks, how much of the book is dedicated to GM advice and how much is dedicated to optional rules?
So the GM advice is mostly in the first chapter. Now, every section is going to have advice on how to use it. So, for example, that building creatures section, a lot of that is advice on how to build a creature. And the building worlds section is going to tell you kind of, building planes, for example, is going to tell you the mechanics for planes. It's also going to give you some advice on how to make good ones. So there's kind of advice throughout the book, but most of it's kind of condensed to that first chapter. We don't want to give you tools and then not tell you the implications of those. So,
because what good is a tool if you don't know how to use it, right? So yeah, that makes sense. There was I think kind of a good segue. There was a question earlier about what's your favorite variant rule, and maybe this is a good chance to talk about those.
So the variant rules, let's see, my favorite. We've got some interesting ones. I think the probably the one that I'm most likely to use is the level 0 characters.
Okay.
Which is effectively, you kind of make your character and stop before you get to class, and you kind of have those kind of starter abilities. And that's a spot where it's like the advice is talking about like how are games different if you use level 0 characters, and how usually your mileage is going to be a little limit on those, right? You might not want to go like, well, I'm going to have to get 1,000 XP to level up with this level 0 character, right? But you might do a single session or maybe 2 sessions at level 0. I think that one is one of the most useful. The other one I'd be pretty likely to use is deep backgrounds. So you have a section on kind of generating backgrounds from components, and then you kind of pick which parts you want.
Okay.
So it ends up looking a lot like the backgrounds in the core rulebook, but you've kind of told a little more of the character's backstory through making this deep background.
I see. Makes it a little bit more customizable too, even from your backstory. So we have a question from Healer Zero from Twitch. Are there much in the way of player options in this book?
This book, as its name would indicate, is very heavily GM focused. So there are things that the players are going to want to get, but there aren't things that they can just go take, essentially. And I think we'll talk in a second, I think, about one of the ones I think is going to be really appealing to players. But I do just want to establish, like, there are things that if your GM incorporates them into your game are going to be really compelling, but there's not like new archetypes or new feats that just anybody can take. They need to be kind of introduced by the GM. But the one I think I do want to talk about that, we even include a variant where like the players make all the decisions is the Relics system.
Yeah. Tell us more about Relics.
So Relics,
I have not seen this section at all.
We've got a few different kind of like expansions on magic items because there's the core rulebook is focused really primarily on ones that the players are going to use. So we have artifacts in here. So a lot of the classics and some new ones. We have intelligent items, we have cursed items, and then we also have relics, which is a new system. This is one that Jason came up with while we were working on the playtest, and we ended up not being able to fit it into the playtest or into the core rulebook because it's fairly chunky. It's kind of a big section.
Right.
And it's gone through a couple different iterations. Most notably, War for the Crown kind of used Pathfinder 1 version of the system we had at that time.
Okay.
What we ended up doing was kind of making it a little more general because a relic is something where you have an item. Maybe it's it's my grandmother's axe kind of item, or maybe it's something you find in an early adventure. This is an item that is going to grow with you as you continue to play the game. And we talk a lot about kind of the implications of that, how you might discover one,
right?
How to integrate them into your story.
So you have one sword that you might find at low level, but it changes
more powerful.
Yeah,
and changing as the story kind of affects it,
and becomes a part of your story because it's sort of leveling with you,
and it can kind of be your iconic weapon.
Right.
And we have kind of split them in. You start out with something called a seed, and the seed is going to have like a couple themes tied to it.
Okay.
And this is pretty free flowing if you're making your own for an adventure. So maybe Leo, you start out with this character and you do have your grandmother's axe, and you decided, she lived in the woods all her life and, hunted animals. And so you could be like, okay, so I'm going to take the beast theme, and then each theme kind of has some different abilities to it. So like you might, as it goes up, the GM might say like, well, it has developed this new ability all of a sudden, and there's rules for rules and suggestions for how you can kind of use that in the backstory and what moments are good for introducing those. But you might just be like, it grows into like this more powerful and stranger kind of primal relic over time, the longer you hold on to it.
So that's pretty cool because in that way the weapon takes on sort of a life of its own.
Yeah.
Too. Yeah, that's really awesome.
And we have a bunch of different categories of the manifestations. So like there's celestial ones, beast ones, plant, fire, water, a whole bunch of different varieties. So you can kind of put together whatever bits you want to make that item and have it grow more over the course of the game.
Cool. Awesome. Were there any questions about relics? I was so excited by the idea. I like that. I want haunted music instruments as familiars. That's, if Michael said that, that makes sense to me. It really does.
Yeah, that sounds like Mike.
Yeah. Here we go. A question from the forums from Gloom. Will there be rules for creating NPC characters that do not have a traditional class, such as fighter, cleric, or rogue? Something like commoner, expert, aristocrat, but not terrible.
So the interesting thing there is, and this is something we've done with the NPCs in this book, is that we, like I was saying, we didn't want to, have you just kind of build a baker who is really good at attacking because they needed enough skill ranks to be a good baker.
Sure.
Instead, what we've done is kind of said the level of the creature is going to be its combat stats. So, like, if it's a baker, that might be a level -1 creature or a level 0 creature.
Right.
It's not good at combat, and that's fine. Maybe it throws loaves of bread at you, and that's about it. They're not, maybe they're good with a pizza cutter, but they're not going to be really amazing in combat.
But if I want to have a last wall bake-off,
then it's like, well, that was a level -1 challenge, and that baker sure did kick your butt, but no XP for you, right? So what we've done, and Peyton, if you want to pull up the NPC picture you have, this is a chunk of the NPCs chapter. So what we've done, this is the healers section. What we've done is said, like, if you're for some reason challenging one of these NPCs in their field, we're going to tell you what level of challenge that is. So for example, that baker might be level 8 for baking, and not for anything else. If you beat it up, you're not going to get level 8 XP for it.
Galarian's Bobby Flay. Right. Baker's ready. Yeah. Okay.
But if you do a bake-off, then you might, you've faced a challenge appropriate to you. And you can, a couple of these stat blocks have something like that. So this is the healers section. You can see that these are formatted a lot like the bestiary.
Yeah.
Where we have a similar format, similar sidebars of interesting mechanics or interesting lore for these creatures. In this, because they're kind of normal people, we kind of leaned a little more toward the rules side for those sidebars, just because usually, like, as a GM, you're going to kind of know what a physician is like, and so we didn't want to, kind of give lore about physicians except when we had something really interesting to say, because this book is a little more kind of meant to be a little more generic, a little more useful. So you'll notice that these creatures are all human, which is also something that we did on purpose for this book. And we have kind of some quick templates. So you can say, I want this to be a dwarf. It's going to tell you a couple things you can do to make them more dwarfy. But one of the benefits of kind of building the stats the way we do is that you don't have to kind of rebuild that creature from scratch or make a whole ton of adjustments just to change it from being a human to being a dwarf.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and what I really like about these too is they sort of show what you were talking about with special ability design too. Like I just giggled when this came up, because if you all look at that, you'll see medical malpractice is one of the surgeon abilities, and you make a medicine check against their fortitude DC. If you're successful, you do extra precision damage. And I was just, I love the name. I love the idea. It's just great, but it kind of shows how each NPC has their own flavor. Yeah. Like I think the librarian in the scholar section can literally throw the book at you. Like they can make a range strike with a book, which is awesome.
There are a couple characters who throw books. I think we saw one of them. It's like, well, the librarian needs that too, clearly, because I think like maybe one of the lawyers had it, or the judge.
Yeah.
So we have several different sections. We have courtiers, criminals, devotees. This is healers. There's about 14, 15 of them that are going to have a bunch of kind of different categories of NPCs.
Striker, librarian class, Trog 11 or TRGG. I love that.
Yeah, and that was one of the things with the first edition NPC classes was like, compared to a PC class, like they just didn't have the cool stuff, right?
Yeah.
And you still want your baker or your librarian to feel interesting and to have some stuff that's specific to them. So that was one of the things we really shot for with these.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just think that's a great aspect of building NPCs now that sort of interfaces with them. So from Twitch, Statler97 says, is there info on creating interesting magic items? I'd like to see more wands with additional effects.
Yeah, there certainly is. So one of the parts of the tools chapter is a section on building items. So that's another one where it's like, in first edition, we had kind of like, here's a system, and if it casts a spell, it's worth this much gold. And if it can cast it 18 times, it's worth this much gold.
Right.
Which we've moved away from that as well. So a lot of this is advice heavy, kind of about, it'll tell you some benchmarks. Like this is when you start to get +1 bonuses to skills or +2 bonuses to skills. And those are kind of how we base our items. But a lot of it is about kind of the art of making an interesting item, making something that is not too difficult to use or too much to track, something that's going to be about the right complexity level that you want. So there is like quite a bit on making items.
And what's sort of cool, just to go back about NPCs that you kind of reminded me of when you're talking about items, that sort of just with item design, you can kind of make a more traditional item, but even with NPCs, like you could make a more traditional, like with I think I saw some class roadmaps, like with the NPCs, you could make a more traditional alchemist, and there are tools provided, or a more traditional fighter. But if I want to mix and match, kind of what I was talking about with the monk rogue earlier, I've also got tools to easily see sort of from my buffet what I want to combine.
That also reminds me of something, talking about items and the NPCs. We also I think the surgeon uses a scalpel as a weapon. Like they aren't necessarily just limited to just what's in the core rulebook. Everything is kind of themed to them, and so they might have a few like special items you haven't seen before in their stat blocks.
And to figure out how it works, it'll say like it functions as, whatever, so that you can still parallel and know exactly, how much damage it does, or its range increments if it's ranged or whatever. But awesome. Any other questions? Stethoscope Groat. I love that. From the forums, the Magic Sword writes, will there be guidelines for building gods for use by clerics and paladins, like the number of domains, etc.?
Yeah. We do have some stuff about kind of building out your pantheons.
Right.
The deities themselves are really pretty straightforward, and like the number of domains, because you kind of have to spend feats to get into those domains anyway. Like if it's 4 or if it's 6, in most games, that's not really going to make a huge difference. We kind of try to build them in a specific way for the core game, just because we know, thousands of people will be using that.
Right.
But for your home game, give them how many spells you want and it's thematic, and give them how many domains you think is thematic. I think the only really kind of tricky balance point on those is if you give them an advanced weapon as their favored weapon, that can be a little strong. So that's the only thing to really be mindful of. The rest of it you can be pretty flexible on.
Yeah. There's a question that we didn't really talk too much about subsystems yet, but it's maybe a good chance to move there. Captain Nemo writes, 726 writes, will the subsystem see use in the second AP as it releases around the same time, or maybe just generally where will we see these types of subsystems in the future?
I'm not sure. I haven't been working on this the second AP so much. So like I was saying
I worked
earlier,
on it a little. I can actually.
Okay, yeah.
So you'll see things that are like victory points, and maybe you should talk a little bit about the victory point system. But definitely in Extinction Curse, you're going to see things that utilize the same types of rules for sure.
So as Leo said, victory points are kind of how we start off talking about the subsystems chapter, because they're kind of a framework you can use for whatever you want. So for example, it talks about victory points as a concept, but really it's talking about rename these to whatever makes sense for the system you're using.
Right.
Build them up or count them down, however you need to. It is mostly about giving you guidelines on about like how many you want to use, what kinds of effects you're going to get from using them in different ways. And it's kind of giving you that baseline so that you can then build your own subsystems and you can easily understand the other subsystems. So for example, victory points is going to tell you that you can have 2 groups who are both counting up their points. Whoever gets to the target number first is going to be the one that has succeeded, right?
Sure.
But how you actually implement that in your game, and whether you tell the players you're counting it or whether you just use it as a tool for yourself, all that can be really flexible.
Right. And I loved how it's broken down in the book as well, where it kind of talks about the scale. You can go sort of small to the encounter piece, but if you want to do something adventure wide that's pervasive, where you're saying, hey, this is your reputation, or whatever that is, or something that kind of sits in the background, to your point, that you can sort of do a gotcha or a that sort of thing that's there.
So then we talk about those in general, and then we have some kind of specifics on a few certain ones. So influence is one, research is one, chases are one, infiltration is one.
Cool.
And infiltration appears in one of the volumes of the Age of Ashes AP.
Oh, nice.
There's a extended kind of infiltration kind of heist scene.
So how deep undercover you've actually kind of went?
Yeah, there's kind of like the legwork to get in preparation, and then there's kind of how aware the enemies are of you. That's kind of measured by their awareness.
Cool.
So, and that awareness is kind of a form of victory points. So it's pretty flexible. It's kind of generic enough that you can use it for whatever system you need to make, but we're telling you enough information that you can use it wisely.
Got it. On the forums, Raving Dork writes, what might we expect in terms of kingdom building, running our own businesses, commanding mass armies, that sort of thing?
So a couple of those, kingdom building and mass armies, we don't have much on that in here because those are very large. Like to do them properly, you have to devote a whole lot of space to them. And we decided to kind of hold off on those for a little bit later so we can do them in full detail.
Sure.
The third one, which was...
I'd have to look. Mass armies, I think, was the last one. Kingdom building.
Oh, the other was running a business.
Yeah.
So we do have a section on kind of downtime and running downtime. And one of the things we talk about there is running a business or doing investments, that kind of thing. And kind of a framework for if you're doing downtime, how to do things that are not explicitly called out in the core rulebook, how to make those work within your downtime. And also talking about kind of like what groups downtime is good for, how to run it so it stays interesting, some of that kind of general advice.
Got it. From the forums, Demerciless, are there rules for removing alignment from games in the Game Mastery Guide? If so, how do those rules work with spells, abilities, and other things that directly interact with alignment in a mechanical level?
So there are rules for removing alignment, and we give a few different, and actually for altering alignment as well. So we kind of have three kind of main ways you can do it. One is just remove it entirely. I want to have something that feels a little more like the real world. There are more kind of shades of gray. There's no kind of magical absolute I can look to. That's one option. Another is to kind of restrict it down to just like, well, there's demons and devils. Those are capitally evil. And then those are the things that that anti-evil magic works against. But normal people are not kind of that supernatural evil. That's they have, behaviors that we might call evil, but that's not that's not what magic talks to, basically. And then there's a third one, which is kind of a sliding alignment scale. There's something similar in, I think in Unchained, that talks about kind of like, it gives you a little more kind of signposts. It's like, well, you're drifting toward evil, so so you don't fall to evil automatically, but you can kind of see that progression and kind of use that in a little more granular system. If you still like having alignment, but you feel like it doesn't quite go far enough in showing kind of a character progression.
Gotcha. As far as variants go, I think I saw a question that moved through there pretty quick about how do you use proficiency without level, or at least somebody was checking, we talked about this. Is there anything you can say kind of about that? Because I think that's a really intriguing concept and a modification some folks might want to make.
We talk about it some, kind of saying that, Pathfinder by default is kind of we get really good at things.
Right.
And we can take on, 100 orcs at a certain level and we'll be fine.
Yeah.
And the proficiency without level is kind of more like, you're looking for a different style of game.
Right.
You're looking at one where it's like, if I'm the best swordsman in the world and 5 swordsmen come after me who are way less good at sword fighting than I am, but there's 5 of them, I'm still in trouble.
Right.
If you're running that kind of game, we talk about how that's what this change really works well for. And we talk about kind of how to build out your campaign in order to make that theme fit.
Okay, cool. Just saw that go through, so I figured we'd give it a second. Let's see. This is TRDG11 from the Twitch. If so, how do those rules work with spells, abilities, and other things that direct? Oh no, sorry, I read that one already. That one. Are there new traps?
There are some new traps. There's a whole bunch of new hazards that come with there's the creating hazards, and then there's new hazards to kind of flesh out your toolbox or arrows in your quiver there.
Sure.
There are some new traps. It's weighted a little more heavily toward more environmental hazards and more haunts, because those are the ones that didn't get nearly as many in the core rulebook. But there's going to be new traps in there as well.
Awesome.
And as many traps as you want to make with the suggestions about how to build traps.
Sky's the limit.
And also, one of the other things that's in the tools chapter, one of the other things that was in there is artifacts. And I know people already got a little bit of a preview of that if they came to 3-Action Game Night, because the deck of many things was in there.
Desk of many things.
Not the desk of many things.
The desk of many things.
Peyton's typo lives on. The desk of many things.
Becoming an item, that's my goal.
Unfortunately, the desk of many things did not make the cut in the Game Mastery Guide, so Peyton's going to have to kind of fight to get it put into a future book. But there's like the Sphere of Annihilation is in there.
Yeah.
There's a new kind of alchemical artifact that can make alchemical items. That's really cool.
Cool.
So there's a bunch of neat stuff in there.
Nice.
And the intelligent items we've also revamped a lot. So a lot of the kind of really, really in-depth rules that were in first edition, we kind of said like, this is a character, let's treat it like a character. Let's have the GM, role play this item. So we kind of give you the boundaries of what the rules say about what the item can and can't do. And then a lot of it, we leave a lot more up to kind of the players and the GM.
Is there an orb in there that might be special for Age of Ashes too? Did I see that?
There is an orb in there.
There might be an orb.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's in a little better shape than the one that appears in Age of Ashes.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll just leave it at that. From the forums, Technotrooper asks, will there be additional guidance and examples on how to apply the stealth, perception, detection, ready action, and initiative rules, moving from exploration to encounter mode in situations such as an ambush, breaking down a door, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so there's a pretty good amount in the advice on running encounters about how to manage initiative and how to transition between exploration and an encounter. And some of those are kind of examples in there. It's like, okay, if people are sneaking up, here's how that works. So there's a pretty good amount of information on that, because we know that's kind of something that's changed significantly. So we want to kind of go into a little more detail on that.
Sure.
That's also another part of the game with a lot of these. It's like, here's the rule, but we in the core rule book, but we give you more advice in this book to kind of say, like, we are putting more control in the GM's hands with this edition, and here's how best to exert, that responsibility you have.
Got it. From the forums, Torg Smith writes, what kind of downtime activities will be in the Game Mastery Guide?
So we are going to have, like I said, the kind of chat in the downtime advice section that's talking about, kind of improvising and creating new downtime activities. That's going to be kind of the main thing that's in there. Some of the subsystems are going to talk a little bit to downtime. Those are kind of the main parts of it. There aren't as many, like the kingdom building kind of thing isn't in here, which would be like a large scale downtime activity.
Sure.
And a lot of that is just down to having the room for it.
And if you want some of that now, there are some castle building, kingdom building, downtime activities in the Age of Ashes adventure path.
That's right.
So if you're hungry for that stuff now, and I'm tooting my own horn here because I wrote a little bit of those castle rules, but they're there. So use them and check them out. There's some really
you'll
great
have to
stuff in
expand on them a lot, but they're going to give you an idea of kind of like the scope of things that you can do with those activities. And then the Game Master Guide is going to give you a little more about, like, here's how much you should really be able to accomplish with your downtime in a given time frame.
Let's see, what other questions do we have? From Twitch, NerdMango27 writes, do you have more guidance on setting DCs in the book? More examples, maybe?
There's not a whole ton on DCs, just because we made the system for setting them really straightforward in the main book. The main thing I would say is just like, most of the time you can just use the simple DCs.
Yeah.
And you can adjust them with the easy or hard adjustments if you need to. The game mastering chapter of the core rulebook, look at that kind of list of that like nice long bulleted list of kind of guidelines for improvising rules. That's going to get you really far.
Yeah. Well, and as I found out in our game with James Jacobs the other night, even climbing rope sometimes can, the simple DC for that can be really challenging for a, I think I had, let's see, a fighter with a +7 modifier, and I think I rolled no higher than 4.
Oh my.
So yeah, that was a great night.
That was not your rope.
Lots of falling damage. It was a falling damage night. What's next? Let's see. From the forums, Corvo Spirit Wind writes, will the Game Mastery Guide have magic items? I need my gloves of shaping back as soon as possible. I love that. I need my gloves of shaping.
No gloves of shaping, I'm afraid. We have another book coming up that is probably going to have more items for PCs, coming out at Gen Con next year. But the Game Mastery Guide is really kind of those ones that tend to be GM gated. Yeah. So if you might start petitioning your GM to get an artifact into your game soon, and, kind of butter them up in advance. Yeah. Buy them some Taco Bell or whatever. But it's going to be they're mostly like very story based items in this book that we know we want the GM to have a lot more control over.
And I know I keep kind of saying this, but remember, in the adventure paths, there are in the adventure toolboxes, there's more magic items there too. So if you're looking for more, the world guides, if you're looking for those types of things, that's where they're located in our peripheral products right now. So let's see this top one. Via Twitch, Milk Money 1974 writes, any discussion on post level 20 challenges, either for use for extreme challenges for level 20s or that sort of thing?
There's not a whole lot on that in here. We don't talk there's some maybe in the building encounters section, but we don't deal a whole lot kind of with the stuff that's beyond the normal scope of the game, mostly because that's another thing where it's like, if we really want to get into like, pushing past 20 and really, god tier characters, that's something that would also need kind of more space to breathe to really.
I noticed one of the tables in building creatures, I think went up beyond level 20 a little bit.
Yeah, I think they go up to 25. There's kind of the scale on there where I believe 24 is kind of like, that's an extreme encounter. 25 is kind of something we expect that you probably can't beat unless you've got a whole lot of kind of GM controlled stuff on your side, basically.
Right.
You know,
right.
you've got artifacts and that kind of stuff that are helping you out, or really beneficial circumstances that are kind of beyond like your normal capabilities. So there are kind of still some stats for making creatures up that high.
What's another thing that we haven't really covered too much? Did you want to talk more about subsystems?
Sure, we can talk about subsystems a little bit. We haven't talked about vehicles much.
Yeah, let's talk about vehicles.
So we do have a pretty good section on vehicles in there, and we also have some really cool chapter opener art that has like Valeros and Lim on like this crashing airship. That's really cool.
Nice.
I've only seen the sketch so far. I don't know if
are they in a precarious position?
A little precarious,
yeah,
you might say.
Yeah.
It's not looking
I
great
guess
for
if it's
them.
crashing, stupid question. Yeah.
They don't seem to have feather fall. That's what you're wondering. But they're the vehicles are kind of based on the Starfinder system.
Sure.
Because that had kind of come out between now and when the Pathfinder 1 system was made. So it's got a kind of a similar batch of stats for that. We've also kind of changed how the pricing works on them, so you don't have like, well, it's one sword. How much could it be worth? 5 long ships,
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. We've made it's attaining that ship on the markets that's the challenge, not
Right. Right.
So we kind of made it so that things that should be very expensive, like certain ships, are actually very expensive, even for a PC.
Gotcha.
Ship combat. TRD G11 asks if there's ship combat. These have all the rules for using vehicles. We don't talk a lot about specifically like ship-to-ship fights,
Right.
but if you need to run that, you're going to have all the rules for it.
There's another good question right after that. I think it's T3 or F3 cubed. Sorry, I've got really nearsighted eyesight. How are chases going to be structured?
So chases are going to use kind of that victory point system to measure progress.
Yeah.
And you're going to be, it's generally based on like, assuming that the group is working together and trying to chase down their foes. And they're, sometimes helping each other through the progress. But it does kind of talk about, what happens if they go separate routes or only some of them engage in that chase. So you're kind of measuring progress to try to catch up to them. Yeah, it's a relatively straightforward structure. It's mostly about kind of the obstacles you encounter on your way and how you overcome them.
Right, and that's the thief is getting away. I'm Valeros. I'm going to chase
Right.
them down and get my MacGuffin back.
And you don't actually want to count out all those squares of movement and,
right.
find out that it only really mattered that one person technically had a higher land
Sure.
speed.
Keep a high cinematic feel, high fantasy.
Exactly.
Yeah. Spamatron has a question. Is there any advice for encounter building for players of different skill levels? For example, how to approach an encounter for 8 to 10-year-old kids versus veterans who've mastered the combat engine?
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
We have a section in the advice part that's called special circumstances. That's kind of about running different types of games outside kind of the baseline norm. So that's going to have stuff like, I've only got 2 players, or I'm trying to run a game for Pathfinder Society. Various kind of situations that come up that it's like the game wasn't built with the expectations. Like it's kind of built with 4 players, around a table in somebody's home playing together. This kind of covers some of those more extreme situations that require some extra care and extra attention.
Cool. Another question, Authorus Dale, are there any sections that deal with how to vary time pressure in ways that feel fresh or different without needing the same style of time pressure for encouraging how much exploration time PCs feel comfortable with?
So there's a little bit of that. So kind of talking about how, how the amount of time the PCs have is going to affect the tension of the game. There's some talk about that. Yeah.
Why is the song Under Pressure playing through my head right now as you talk about that? Pushing down. Yeah, anyway.
Yeah. Take another question from the people in the streets.
Right. Yeah, I shall help them. Crazy Stitch 519, I love that name, writes, is there going to be rules for magic item creation?
There are, yeah. There's a whole section on building items that's going to kind of tell you, the best practices for using items, what items are appropriate for which levels.
And I hear the item quirks are pretty cool.
Yeah, there's a section on item quirks that can let you just kind of like, if you want to just add a little bit of weird color to your item,
Yeah.
you know, there's something strange about it, make it feel a little more magical. You can roll up or pick a quirk that's gonna do something a little weird.
Really excited about these in the editorial.
Oh yeah,
in the editing cube, because we like weird things. Everybody does, right?
And that's part of the fun of the game, right? And that's with a lot of the things we're doing here with how we're building intelligent items, how we're doing relics, how we built the NPCs. It's all about like giving something unexpected so that the game feels fresh and that you know, you get interesting surprises throughout your play.
Gotcha. Alora Bain is asking advice variant for the exchange of class feats amongst classes. So do you have advice for that?
So we don't have advice specifically on that, though we do have something that is kind of applicable to that, which is we have a section about dual classing. So you want to play what I think 3.5 D&D called a Gestalt character. You want to get everything from a sorcerer and everything from a wizard and just smush them together and have everything. We've got a section about that. So that's going to be probably the part that is most applicable to, you know, kind of feat trading. It also talks about like doing some themed variants, like I want everybody in my group to get the pirate archetype because in this game they're all pirates. It talks about like how to do that, the best ways to do that. There's a few other variants. It's there's a feats and features section that's like, you know, I want to, you know, change how many class feats people get. I want to, you know, give those free archetypes. That's all in there.
Okay. Awesome. Troy 1989 asks, will there be rules on making puzzles? That's a really good question because puzzles can be really tricky.
Puzzles can be tricky. We don't talk about that in this book much, though. There are a lot of, I would kind of point you there. That's another one that's like, can be really hard to convey, especially in text.
Yeah.
If I'm going to do puzzles, I usually look at like YouTube or streamers who kind of cover that kind of thing more in depth. My friend Richard Milena does a lot of kind of puzzle stuff.
Cool.
He's a good resource for that. Look him up. I can't remember the name of his channel off the top of my head, but I can. I'll post it on my Twitter later after.
Cool.
After the stream here.
F3 Cubed writes, are there rules on creating other mechanical things like feats or subclass features?
We don't dig into feats and class features because those are so kind of, or spells, because all those require so many different considerations that even telling you how to do it is, for a lot of people, is going to leave them as confused as when they started because it is so cross-disciplinary. You kind of have to look at this and the implications here and here and here. So that's something we didn't really have the room to fully flesh out in this book. Right. I would kind of say the same thing we say with a lot of our advice, which is look at similar things and see where you can adjust it to make it do what you want it to do.
Sure. Start off with that goal in mind and then... Yeah.
Oh, and always, like anything you're designing, think about what you're trying to accomplish, what feel you're trying to get, because that has to, if it hasn't achieved that, then it hasn't succeeded as a rule.
Right. Ultimately, the feeling that the players get is the experience. So Milk Money 1974 writes, are there any sections on monster templates, either simple or complex?
We don't have a whole lot of templates, partially because usually if it's a specific monster like a vampire or something, we've given like the exact template in the bestiary, and there aren't that many things that we really have like a kind of generic graft for anymore. But we do talk about some special templates for NPCs. So the NPC section has a bit at the front that has some quick templates. That's some of like the turn them into a dwarf kind of stuff. I can't remember all the details on what's included in there off the top of my head. But it's going to have some basic customization for those NPCs.
Okay, awesome. What do y'all have? Any other fun questions, or is there another system we can talk about?
There's a lot of details about the planes in this book too.
Oh, cool.
So if you're wondering like what are the if you want kind of an overview of the planes of the campaign setting, those are in there, and also along with kind of the planar traits and how you can create your own planes using all that stuff.
Oh yeah, I'm really excited about those NPC templates too. I was just looking.
Milk Money 1974 is going to play Spelljammer. I don't think we have that kind of vehicle in there. You know, it's not our trademark, so we don't have that.
Nerd Mango 27 duels. I heard there were duels.
There are duels. Yeah, there's a section on kind of running duels. They're pretty straightforward. And this is another one where it's like where a one-on-one combat, the normal encounter rules maybe won't work so well. They aren't going to get that feel across because it's going to be just like, well, I rolled high initiative, bleh, I kicked your ass,
Sure.
and it's over. So there's a little more about kind of like the setup and the back and forth of duels in there. And that's also a good spot where you could incorporate the victory point rules. If you kind of want to say like, all right, we're going to 5 points in this duel and this is the judge, then you can kind of use that framework for tracking it. Because victory points, like, you can use them for behind the scenes stuff like this, how this chase is going, but you can also just use them for in-world stuff. It's like,
Right.
all right, these points are literal points in the world because you're having a jousting tournament or whatever.
And that might be a situation where you have those opposed victory points, kind of what we were talking about before, where you each, like, I challenge you
trying to
to a
set the high
duel.
score,
Who insults the other one fastest or something. Yeah. So maybe we can elaborate a little bit. Are there both verbal and combat duels? So like social duels and combat duels?
I don't know that detail off the top of my head. Mark worked primarily on that one.
Okay.
I haven't had a chance to look at that section yet.
Gotcha.
I think it definitely has combat duels, and I think it talks a little bit about the other ones, but I don't know if it has a huge amount of difference between those.
I saw earlier there was it appealed to my ego. Chemlack said that they loved the downtime rules, and you should thank James Jacobs for that because he did a great job developing some of the things we all wrote.
Is that for Age of Ashes?
Yeah, and the second chapter specifically. So I'm glad you love those, Chemlack. That's awesome.
Yeah, in the second chapter, some of the stuff in Age of Ashes was kind of like, well, we know we're going to have this thing in the Game Mastery Guide, but we need to figure it out now instead. So, like the infiltration was something like that as well, and some of that kind of influence stuff in chapter 2 was like, all right, well, we need to at least think far enough ahead that this is going to look relatively similar to what we're putting in the Game Mastery Guide.
So I know one of the things I've seen a lot on the forums and in Facebook groups and things like that are people asking, okay, I'm really excited about Pathfinder Second Edition. I've read the core rule book. Mm-hmm. I've read the bestiary. I want to go, but I'm not a GM or I want to learn how to be a GM. Yeah. What would you say to somebody as far as this book goes? Like why they should evangelize this book, why they should buy this book? Yeah. What should they say? Like what's the reason to take a look at this and how can this book help you sort of play the game?
Yeah. So the main thing I would say is, like, if you're curious about getting into it, first off, read that section in the core rulebook, because that's going to tell you a lot about whether you want to do that job, and it's going to give you the basic advice for doing that job.
Right.
And like, if you are playing like a basic game, you might be good with just that.
Sure.
Like, you don't need to jump straight into the deep end with this book, right? And like, I want people to buy this book, don't get me wrong, but if you're still kind of tentative, I would look at the core rulebook first. Now, if you look at that and you're like, I feel like I need more, I feel like I want to be able to do some things that this book and the bestiary aren't going to allow me to do, that's when you want to look at that. Or if you say, like, the game doesn't do something I want to do, I don't like this alignment thing, I don't like how proficiency works, I love Starfinder and I want to have stamina.
Right.
I want to have a stamina system. That's in this book. Like,
so this is a great additional argument to somebody who says, but I don't like this subsystem. I don't like how this is working. Right. It's like, well,
see if that's in the Game Mastery Guide.
Yeah.
And it's all about kind of customizing your game, and it's going to give you some advice if you're like, I don't think I know how to run exploration right.
Right.
This is going to give you a lot of advice on that. So I would say, see if you're satisfied with the core rulebook. If you're looking for more, if you're looking to go deeper, pick up this book.
Cool. That's a great answer. Just a reminder, this is the last chance for the giveaway. If you are interested, you should type !Pathfinder 2E in chat. In a minute, the giveaway will end because we're about to conclude.
Time's running out.
Yeah. Under pressure, like we said.
That's right.
There's time constraint rules.
Oh, there's another thing I want to mention that's in this book. There's a lot of kind of like little sections of tools. Like I haven't gone over nearly everything. There's a bunch more afflictions in this book. I think I'm just going to do a quick rundown of like, here's a bunch of stuff, because I realized, I hadn't even mentioned stamina. If you want something more similar to skill points, there's a version of that. If you want a reason to like diversify your skills and kind of spread them out a little more, there's a system for that. If you want to do ability point buy, there's ability point buy in this book. If you want to get rid of magic items entirely in your game and say like, oh, you don't need an item to get a bonus to attack rolls, that's in here. If you
low fantasy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You want a bunch of art objects and gems to kind of add a little more kind of detail to your treasure hoards without having to do all the research yourself, that's in here.
Wow. Cool.
If you want a system for reputation and leadership, those are in here. If you want, there's a section on rarity in your game. If you're not quite sure how to use rarity or you want to kind of mess with how it works.
Sure.
There's stuff about how to structure campaigns, to do adventures, how to draw maps, how to adjudicate rules, kind of a little more in depth on that, how to deal with problems in your game. All that kind of stuff is in here. Okay.
I've seen a couple questions about this, and I feel like we should. When's the current release date?
Early 2020.
Early 2020.
Yeah.
There you have it.
All right. So I think it's about time to pick a winner. All right. We've got it.
Go ahead.
All right. You're going to make me pronounce it.
Yeah.
a radio station has one. KPULV is the winner of this poster.
Kapolv?
And Kapolv.
Kapow. Kapolv. Sorry.
Kapolv has gotten Kapolverized with this great award. Yeah, so you're going to get this special hero point and poster. If you are sad you didn't win anything, come back to more streams and maybe you'll get another chance.
Look it.
It's a big dragon. We're going to rip your poster right now.
Yeah, right? I don't want to do that. And there's your coin. So,
yeah, congratulations.
Woo.
All right.
Well, hey, we just wanted to say thanks to everybody who showed up and asked great questions. We really appreciate the support. We hope you're super excited about the Pathfinder Game Mastery Guide. And that's pretty much all we have.
Yeah.
So
thanks for joining us here.
Yeah.
If you're looking for us later, you can find me on Twitter. I'm at Logan Bonner.
And I'm at Leo Glasswrights on Twitter. So feel free to tweet at us, follow us, and we can answer more questions from there. So cool. Thanks, y'all.
Everybody.
Have a good afternoon.